is still reeling from the chaos that the invasion unleashed. Learned, the delusions of what military force can achieve haven't disappeared. President Trump famously promised this war in Iran would last 4 weeks or less. Now, 2 months in, with the global economy in a chokehold and predictions of famine and recession looming, the exit strategy is a ghost. My guest today is Michael Scheuer. He's a 22-year CIA veteran who originally published Imperial Hubris anonymously while still an active duty officer. He's taught at Georgetown University and served as a senior fellow at the Jamestown Foundation. From inside the belly of the beast, he's been a relentless critic of interventionism, but he's also garnered his fair share of controversy, not least over his comments on political violence against enemies and his view that Israel is the primary driver of US foreign policy today. So, I want to explore how he reads the present moment. Is Iran another Iraq in the making? Who actually benefits from this trajectory and who is driving it? And is it possible that American imperial hubris is still its own blind spot? Michael Scheuer, welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure, thank you.
Well, let's start right at the beginning, shall we? So you studied history at university, you went on to do a PhD in the British Empire. Was that a natural pathway for you to then join the CIA? And what was it that drew you to the organization in the first place?
I needed a job. I was in Buffalo, New York, where I was born and raised, and I was working on the third shift as a kind of a crane operator. And the third shift is very cold in the winter. And I got a notification from the American Historical Association that the agency was hiring people, and one of the sectors they would hire from would be historians. So I had no intention of that. It was a lucky find for me. And I went and I stayed 23 years.
You stayed for 23 years. What did you like about working inside the CIA?
Well, I liked the people I worked with. I thought we could do things that were important to America. I enjoyed the information that you were access to and understanding better how the world worked and how different people thought. So I was happy to be there. We had a couple of children, and that's why I stayed.
How different is life for an ordinary citizen compared to somebody working within the CIA?
Well, I think it's different depending on what you do at the agency. If you're an analyst, if you're an operations officer, if you are an agent overseas, everything is different. But the security is the big thing. You're always very conscious of things that other people don't know and shouldn't know, and could endanger the United States or its allies if they did become known. So it's something that's always on your mind, and you're careful. I don't think I would say it was terribly onerous, but it's something that's constantly a new agent in your mind. Can I do this? Can I introduce myself here? Should I go to that movie or something like that? It's just a bunch of things that you're very conscious of all the time. And being polygraphed every couple of years is a good reminder of your job.
So what kind of stuff did you not do while you were a CIA agent that you now do?
Mostly tell people where I work. Certainly, the ability to talk about some of the things I did there became possible because of all the information that was published after 9/11. And it went from the security side of things to just more open source material. And it was one thing I was astounded to find as I worked there over the years, is how important open source material is for doing your work. I wrote 4 books on bin Laden, and they were basically based on information that was available in the public domain.
Now, some people might say, once CIA, always CIA. You left 20 years ago, but does anyone actually ever really leave the CIA?
Well, they were pretty glad to see me go, so they haven't bothered me very much. Back in the building since the day I walked out. I've not talked to anyone. No one has called me.
And I gather that all CIA considered materials for public release, whether it's books, articles, or speeches, for pre-publication review to ensure there's sort of no classified information disclosed? I mean, do you still have to run your content by them before you publish anything?
Yeah, all of my books have been run through them, and I'll run this one through them again, yes.
Interesting. You were very active in the media in the early post 9/11 years following your resignation from the CIA. Then you got quiet for a while, and now you're sort of back on the speaking circuit. You've got your own podcast. What's motivated this return to public release?
One thing that has helped is the general turning of America against the Israelis. I lost 3 or 4 jobs after I left the agency because I was critical of the Israelis. And it's become more obvious that people who were, like me, who were really hesitant about turning the conduct of our foreign policy in the Middle East over to the Israelis' whims was correct. And but along the way, until the recent last year and a half, until the recent activities, that was kind of a kiss at death.
Well, a former colleague of yours in the CIA, one former officer who specialized in Middle Eastern liaison, said no other country is as aggressively close to the Israelis as America. He's talking. They work to become intimate, and that makes a difference. You obviously spent 23 years, I think you just said, in the CIA. Can you tell us a little bit about the evolution of the U.S. relationship with Israel when it comes specifically to the secret services? I mean, how central was Mossad to the work of the CIA when you were there, and how did that evolve over the course of your career?
I tried to work on things where neither the Israelis or the Saudis would be very active, because they had such power in the government that even if you had a piece of information that was very important to keep secret, if you denied them the information, they would go to the White House immediately, and whoever was president of the day would come back and say, share the information. So I tried to steer clear of them. I was the chief of operations against Osama bin Laden for 4 years, and we got one piece of information from them over that entire period. And it involved a situation that appeared to be dangerous to life. And we asked for their permission to use it, and they denied it. I used it anyway. And I tried to steer clear of them, because they weren't there only to get information. They were there to tell us what information they wanted and how we could get it, and we should give it to them immediately. And I kind of, just as an American, I resented it. But over the years, when it became so apparent that every agency, a security agency, and probably the military, and no less about that, were under the thumb of the Israelis in a sense. And how does it happen? It happens because they bribe everyone. They own the Congress. Only one person in the Congress doesn't take money from them, from their IPAC or their other organizations. You can see when Netanyahu comes to the United States, that they stand up like seals in the Congress when he speaks to a joint session. Anybody who can put Netanyahu in the same category as somebody like Churchill or Solzhenitsyn is got to be an idiot. So both embarrassing and obviously security risk to let them into the building. And
in terms of the evolution, I mean, did you see you're talking about this sort of fire that you said you saw even early on in your career. I mean, did you see that hold get more intense, or was this just not somewhere that you were working on?
It was generally, I was not in an area where I was dealing with the Israelis with any regularity. Unfortunately, we learned our anti-terrorism schooling came from the Israelis, and so we misplaced a lot of our efforts on going after the same targets that they wanted to go after. Generally speaking, if we weren't intervening in their affair or helping in their affairs, we would not have become the targets we are for Iran. That was one of the costs of being under the thumb.
Well, we're talking at a time where there's been a resurgence of a lot of 9/11 conspiracy theories, some of which actually do involve the Israelis. others sort of, refer to things like the buildings being rigged, but of course the Israeli involvement has been all over social media, or the alleged Israeli involvement. Another was bin Laden was in fact a CIA asset. I mean, you were obviously running the unit that was going after him at the time. What's your take today on what happened on 9/11?
9/11 happened because we didn't kill bin Laden. And we had 10 opportunities just under Clinton. And my successors provided Bush with a couple of opportunities, and Bush couldn't have been less interested as far as I understand. We had a very good hold on bin Laden 10 times with the power of the American military. They could have taken him out, and they decided not to. And there was a lot of story in that. I don't know. The one thing you learn at the agency there is that you don't know what you don't know. And even when you should know it.
I mean, obviously, there are huge question marks over why then President Bush, who would have had the opportunity to get America's most wanted man, would not have proceeded with that.
To be fair to Bush, he didn't have as many chances, but Clinton had no possible reason not to give it a crack. They always operate, when you take a planned operation, the 7th floor, which is the big guys sit on the 7th floor. The question always comes up first, well, what if we try it and it doesn't work? What are the Washington Post going to say? What is the New York Times going to say? And it's never about, what if we don't do this and Americans get killed? It's a very strange thought process that I experienced. What really began to change my mind was the collapse of the Building 7. Long after the planes, and it just collapsed like it was. I don't know if you've seen them, but when they destroy sports stadiums in this country, they always put it on the videos, and it just collapses. It's very elegant. There's no spewing of rocks or concrete. And that's just the way that building went down. And it's hard to not believe that it was loaded with some kind of a material that caused it.
Which, of course, is what hundreds of architects got together and argued in the aftermath.
Absolutely.
Right. So let me ask you this. In your book, Imperial Hubris, you talk about the cost of US leaders' arrogance and reluctance to sort of consider the impact of US behavior abroad. 22 years on from you publishing that book, what lessons has America failed to learn?
Basically, they operate from, I call it, they're in the cult of World War II. They still think it's 1945 in Tokyo Bay, and we hold the same power and the same respect as that happens. And it's a very unusual thing for people to be so full of arrogance and hubris when we've lost every war we fought since 1945. And I don't know what, we're certainly not winning in Iran at the moment. So it's very, very difficult. I would doubt that there was any discussion before the Iran attack about what the people of Iran thought about Iran or Persia. For some reason, they thought that they would, if we went there, they would come out and cheer and throw flowers at us and things. The same deal we heard about how the Iraqis were going to respond. And we're a 250-year-old country this year, and we're taking on a 2,700-year-old country. And you'd have to be a simpleton to believe they'd be out in the streets welcoming us like the French did in 1944 or 45. It's almost like it's an illness that you either don't care or you don't want to take the time to understand how Iranians, how Afghans, how Iraqis think. They don't think like us because they don't have our experience. And we don't think like they do, I think probably because we don't have that much history. But also our education system is clearly not up to par in terms of preparing our children in terms of foreign countries and how different people think. And if they think differently than we do, it doesn't mean they're the enemy. So it's a very distressing thing. Trump talked a good game, and when he turned in, when he became president again, he became a warlord, which I suppose is irresistible to a man or a woman. If they can do everything off their own hook, it's a lot easier than trying to deal with other people. But that remains our ignorance in the world staggering.
You've argued that the US was losing the war on terror due to its inability to interpret their enemy's motivations correctly. What would you say to your fellow Americans about what they're getting wrong today, about whether it's Iran, the Houthis, Hezbollah, or Hamas?
What they're getting wrong is the education that they received through high school, as I did, or through grammar school and high school. The grounding education they got with the World War II films of the concentration camps and the Holocaust. From the time I was 7 or 8 years old, you have to sit and watch those. My generation was educated on what happened in World War II. And you know, once you see one film, you're pretty much can say, yeah, it was a bad thing, shouldn't happen again. But does that mean we sacrifice our country for somebody else? And I think that's what's happened here. The Holocaust was a terrible thing. The amount of people the Japanese killed was a terrible thing. But the people we've killed, in a way, in foreign wars that we didn't win and really didn't need to fight. You know, we're at a point in the United States where no one, since 1945, no military person has died for to protect the liberty of our country, which is about the only reason there is population. You know, you go through the list. How were we really threatened by all the people in Noriega being invaded Panama? And there's no reason to believe, really, at this point in time, that we're going to win any serious war, because we think we're always the biggest guy in the block. It's going to be a walkover and people will love us. If you listen to Mr. Trump, if you listen to most presidents since it took money from the Israelis it sounds like our liberty, our freedom depend on the existence of Israel and the existence of a powerful Israel. Now, of course, there's not a lick of truth in that. But it's everyday belief here in America. We have 20 million evangelists who think that Israel is more important than our country. So it's to overcome. Much of it has to do with education. Much of it has to do with what is criminal operations by the Israelis and the unwillingness of our government to enforce the laws they apply to everyone else in the world to the Israelis. So we're in a pickle.
Well, speaking of pickles, in 2016 you did express your support for Trump's election at the time. What was it that originally drew you to him?
I would vote for him again.
You would? Okay, so do you still consider yourself a MAGA supporter today?
No, I don't consider myself a MAGA supporter at all. I've been a Republican all my life. But that's not the problem. The problem is that America's enemy is in this country. It's not just the illegal aliens, it's the Democratic Party. They always argue that, well, violence comes from both sides. Well, the only violence we've seen in the two Trump administrations came from the Democrats.
What about the January 6th insurrection, which, was, for all intents and purposes...
Which was set up by the government, ma'am.
Which is a Republican government.
No, was set up by the internal part of the government. They threw people in jail, and people are still in jail with no trial. Well, it's like keeping all those Arabs in Guantanamo for what now, 30 years almost, without a trial.
I mean, weren't you one of the key architects of the rendition program?
Yes, I was.
And didn't the rendition program basically turn out to be detaining a majority of people who were unlawfully detained, who were never actually prosecuted for any crimes?
Well, they were not lawfully detained. They were detained because we didn't kill them. And I was in favor of killing the enemy on the field. But that was not or bad publicity that they got a lot of that. But it was a war. They didn't want to try them. Many of them we fought in circumstances where our officers or our allies' officers.
Well, why would you want to try them? Because many of them ended up being released without any charges brought against them, which suggests that they weren't actually engaged in any criminal activity.
Well, I have to say, ma'am, that you have to experience being ruled by the United States government to understand the depth of the deceit of the American people. But certainly, the idea that even an assassin or a terrorist or a Nazi, if you arrest him and begin a legal process, he should come to trial. And whatever the end of the story brings, it brings. But I'm afraid they didn't think it through, and they're now afraid to prosecute and hang them if that's the decision, because it'll offend the rest of the world. You know, for a country that is so eager to wage war, our leadership doesn't want to really piss anyone off, and they somehow don't get the message that most of the things we do really anger, and it's based not on intention, it's based on ignorance. We've had most of our presidents have gone since 1945, and they've been dumb as rocks.
Let me roll back to Trump just briefly, because obviously what you said there was interesting. So you're very critical of Trump, but you would vote for him again purely to keep the Democrats out of power. So what's your main criticism of Trump?
He lied.
It's a pretty big one.
I voted for him both times because he promised to not go to war for useless things unless we were attacked. He went to war in Iraq because the Israelis convinced him Israel was in danger.
In Iran?
In Iran, I'm sorry. Well, I thought there was as much of Israeli that was a big nuclear threat at that time.
So, I mean, is your issue that Trump's war on Iran is kind of unconstitutional? I understand that you think that it's been caused by a foreign power. Just outline for me what exactly it is about the war on Iran that you oppose.
It's unconstitutional. Every war since 1935 has been unconstitutional. And to talk about American virtues in terms of respect for the law and abidance by the law and other things is a farce. The Constitution is much talked about and jabbered about, and very little read, and certainly very misinterpreted. The founders, if you will, were most proud of the fact that they tied the president in knots when it came to war. There only the representatives of the people in both houses of Congress could declare war. But since the Mexican War, it's more often been the president who has decided off his own hook that they were going to get Americans killed doing something in Mexico or doing something elsewhere in the Caribbean or in Africa or in some other place. And it's kind of the definition of that is tyranny.
You've definitely used that term. You've said we have to decide whether we're a constitutional republic or a tyranny, because at the moment we're a tyranny. So what exactly makes America today a tyranny in your eyes?
What made Britain a tyranny when the king could declare, go to war without much approval from anyone? That's what we have here. What we rebelled against and we seem to miss the point that the greatest gutting of liberty in a country is the responsibility of one man to take your kids to war. There must be something so intoxicating about becoming president that you have so much power you want more. That's my position is entirely constitutional. If there are enemies of the United States and we have to defend ourselves, that's fine.
But Trump's war on Iran isn't the only unconstitutional thing he's done, right? I mean, after his second term, he tried to scrap birthright citizenship, violating the 14th Amendment. He froze congressional approved spending. And in May 2025, he moved to cut or block federal public broadcaster funding, which is a violation of the First Amendment. Do you also take issue with these other violations?
Would it be a violation of the First Amendment to deny funding? You shut something down, businesses close all the time. Operations of the government sometimes are defunded. And the public broadcasting has been a scourge to the United States outside of the mysteries and other things they import from Britain. Otherwise, they're on the TV to talk down America, to make sure that people think that everything is bad here. The Constitution doesn't give any power to the federal government to support media. Media should operate off their own hook, no matter if it's Fox News or if it's National Public Radio.
I mean, the public broadcasting is the idea that every citizen should be represented in the production of media, and that actually when you go into privatized media, then essentially you just have the propagation of the views of a few wealthy people who can, fund Fox News or whatever else it is that they want to do. So, I mean, there is a sort of, I would argue, a civic aspect to public broadcasting, however critical we may be of its output, that surely is about, fundamental American values about ensuring that all citizens have a right to be heard and seen in the media space.
I would kind of defy you a little bit, ma'am, if you watch their news programs, to find someone who is conservative. Does National Public Radio give it access to all? The answer is no. Very, very few people. And it's gotten worse in the last 20 years. But I think I think if it was a normal media outlet, or what should be a normal media outlet, presented both sides, that's one story. But any media you put in charge of the government is then indebted to them, just as Fox is indebted to rich donors. It's a dangerous combination. And I understand there's people dissatisfied in Britain with the BBC or with German television in Germany.
No, of course there is, yeah.
I'm for the government staying away from these.
Well, I think most people are. I mean, in Britain we have a slightly different concept. I mean, this is what public broadcasting is really meant to be about, the idea that you pay a tax into a sort of pot of money that is separate to the government's purview. And the mandate of that money is to serve and represent Britons and all their diversity. Look, whether they do that well or not is a different question. But I think the point that I made was more about the fact that you take issue with Trump, sort of violating the Constitution when it comes to Iran. And I'm just curious as to whether you feel that way about other violations of the Constitution that people might point to. As I said, birthright, the attempt to scrap birthright. Or the sort of freezing of congressional spending.
No, ma'am, the birthright citizenship was for the children of slaves.
Taste death!
If you read the context in which the 14th Amendment was written, it was not permanent. What it was to cover the children and make sure, just as their parents, that they were U.S. citizens after emancipation. And that's been hanging around. It's used to flood the country with people coming here to have children, so they get an anchor here. There is a problem with it. I don't want to hurt anybody. Kind of the exception of the Boston Red. But it always struck me when Mrs. Clinton was running about what does diversity do but create more problems? I would think what I've seen in the streets of London over the past 6 months, and what I've seen in the United States over half of my life, is that the more diverse you are, the more violence you have, the more political issues you have, the more money you spend to the point of bankruptcy. There are two parts to every story, and I admit it. People can argue me to death, probably. I'm not that conversant in these things. But the problems caused by them are very apparent even to a dummy like me.
I'm curious who the them is there, and I also do just have to correct that there has not been violence in the streets of London, apart from some far-right hooligans.
I thought I saw
Tell me.
videos where there were large numbers of farmers driving tractors and through the streets, and people going to hospitals and breaking into hospitals, and doctors having to hide.
I live in London. I've lived in London all of my life. I can't recollect anything of the nature that you're talking about. Certainly as a Londoner, I can tell you where...
Somebody's doing a job on your country now.
Well, that is well true, sir. I think we can agree that there is a great amount of attempts to create propaganda around the idea that we in the UK are sort of swarming with too many, brown and black people who are causing problems. And I can tell you that the reality of that picture is very, very far removed from what I see certainly rolling on social media. But let me talk to you a little bit about this idea of tyranny, which we touched on a minute ago. You talk about the idea that the country is now, under the form of tyranny. But you've also said that you would really vote for Trump again just to keep the Democrats out of power. But last year, Bernie Sanders said the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary in the same hands may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. Don't you agree with Bernie Sanders then on this issue? If you're enjoying the show, why not join our Patreon community? The Tea is more than just a YouTube show. It's a space to foster meaningful change together at a time of violent turbulence and dizzying change. Becoming a Patreon means you get exclusive content and the chance to shape the show. So join us now. Link in our bio.
If it happened, it probably would be, yes, I would agree with that. But who is at fault for that agreement? The fault lies in the Senate and in the Congress for giving the president powers they're not eligible to delegate. And if he breaks the Constitution, as he does on every war, our presidents, why haven't they challenged it? They don't give a damn, Sanders rather. They're taking a chance to take a shot at Trump. You know, who got us into this nonsense war in Ukraine? What possible interest did we have in Ukraine? None. And yet Trump promised to end that war, and he's still in it to this day, as far as I know.
For now, yes.
What's the point?
We're seeing a wave of people on the right pushing back against the war on Iran, specifically in the independent media. Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, you yourself, despite being a Trump supporter, have criticized this. What is fueling, to your mind, this shift on the American right towards opposing the war in Iran specifically?
Experience would be the first thing. Those of us of my age, we've watched this since Vietnam. But I think on this one in particular, Trump is the problem. He promised no more wars and long-term foolish wars, super attack. And that's a very clear promise which people voted. But if you have to come down to it, to vote for gangsters like the Democrats over a man who at least is, we've got tax breaks this year, we've got a bunch of other things that have come around. At long last. What are you going to do? Your choice is to vote or not to vote at all. That's just where we are, man. But I've never voted in my life for a Democrat.
I guess I'm just wondering, when you say, that they're gangsters, that we could also right now be looking at the Trump dynasty, if I may, who arguably are enriching themselves very much in the style of gangsters, whether it's Jared Kushner, whether it's Barron. They are making millions off the back of their proximity to power and this war. I mean, is that not gangster behavior? Is, not
Sure it is. It's absolutely gangsterism. Without a doubt, it's gangsterism.
But you're supporting the gangster in power.
Better the gangster you know.
Okay.
They're going to prove that they threw the 2020 election. They're going to prove that. At least he's getting rid of the illegal aliens at a slow rate, but at least nonetheless.
Are these really the problem in America right now? You're in the middle of a war that is costing average Americans, huge amounts in inflation, the cost of, petrol at the pump. We'll see food inflation. A lot of people around the world are going to suffer because of the decisions being made by President Trump. And at the same time, his family are literally making millions off of this catastrophe in various capacities, as are various companies that he is close to. Where does the fixation with illegal immigrants come into this? Isn't it a bit bizarre that that's the focus in the middle of all of this? Doesn't it feel like a distraction?
No, ma'am.
Strategy?
Oh, I think what it is the Americans are not sophisticated people in most cases. We're an insular people. We're more concerned what goes on in this country, and we wonder and amazed at the amount of interest that the president and Congress has in foreign affairs. We have the two greatest allies in the world, and they're called Pacific and Atlantic. And as long as we're as China are, we can defend ourselves if we need. But what interest? Americans think, why are we spending money in Ukraine? Why are we attacking the Iranians when they hadn't attacked us? But you're exactly right. The gangsterism in the government is embedded and deep. You remember that Biden's government was not exactly the tip of genuine patriotism. You remember that Bush turned out to be a lunatic at the end. He got lost because of him. But when you have very little to choose from, I think people choose what is most conducive to the way of life that they believe in.
So it comes back
and I believe in no wars.
It comes back to your
Well,
values.
I believe in anybody could come into this country if they came in legally. I believe that the birthright thing is a farce because it wasn't never intended to go any further than the first generation of emancipated slaves.
I mean, that's obviously one interpretation. Let me ask you now a little bit more about about Israel. Let me ask you about your position is that essentially America has capitulated to Israel, that Israel is now driving US foreign policy. The US provided $3.8 billion in annual military aid to Israel on average, with a recent surge between October 23 and September 25, when military aid to Israel totaled $21.7 billion, not including tens of billions more in future arms sales agreements. Now, you've argued that Israel exerts too much power over US policy. But if he wanted to, Trump could just turn off the taps.
That's very true. But the Congress, the president doesn't allocate money. He has to have the Congress's vote, and they're very intent on protecting that right. So the president can't give $1 million to Israel or $1 million to anybody else without the consent of the Congress. And so what you have is senators and congressmen Israeli television. There's they keep a chart every month on one of the stations showing how much who is getting money from the Israelis. Now, is it a common thing in Britain? Maybe it is for the parliament to be on the take from foreign countries, maybe European countries or maybe the Israelis themselves. But it doesn't make it right. When congressmen and senators vote for billions of dollars of Israel, when children, the number of ill-fed children in this country is so large, what kind of idiocy is that?
I'm right in understanding that the Congress is still majority Republican, though, right?
Right now it is.
Right.
But generally it's Republican-Democrat. Yeah.
But right now these decisions are happening under a Republican president with a Republican majority in Congress.
There is no way to get a vote through Congress that cuts aid to Israel, whether we're in the majority or not, because the majority just means it goes to the Senate. And if you pass a bill that knocks off the deal with Israel, the senators will protect it. And there you need a much bigger vote to get it through. Can you imagine a constitutional republic and a Congress that's probably paid more through the abilities of the Israelis to infiltrate and control what they say than they make from the payment for their jobs? It's almost like it should be a comedy. You get your paycheck every 2 weeks, but you get another little bonus every maybe not every, but a bonus from the Israelis. Now, how do you stop that? The Congress would have to stop it. They'd have to enforce the law. There's arguments that Bobby Kennedy was killed because he was going to put IPAC, he was going to make them register as a foreign power. JFK, he was going to stop them from giving him nuclear weapons. The one thing you can bet is there is no black in the Israeli government that will not kill an American if the time comes to protect their hold on this country.
Now let me ask you this. Professor Norman Finkelstein would say that while the Israel lobby is exceptionally powerful, and I think we all agree on that, it's a mistake to blame Israel for the broad trajectory of US foreign policy in the Middle East. He'd say the US and Israeli interests are fundamentally aligned at the elite level, and that the US actually uses Israel as a reliable strategic asset to project power. He's also argued that the US doesn't want Israel truly at peace with its neighbors, because a peaceful Israel would be less dependent on the US and therefore a less reliable proxy. I mean, what would you say to that?
How many Israelis have been killed fighting for the Americans? None. They fight to defend themselves because they've spent 70 or 80 years making enemies in the region. And I think the American people as a whole, if they ever got a chance to vote, would say, what the hell are you doing in the Middle East? We have all the oil we need. Why are you building 13 bases there?
Why are you?
What's the point of that? But they never get to do it. And why? Because all of their representatives and all of their senators are on the wagon. They're on the Israel wagon.
And not because the
In the
US will
newspapers.
benefit from those bases, not because America benefits from these imperial wars.
If we benefit from them, and I have never seen any evidence that we do, they bankrupt us. They get our kids killed for no reason. Can you imagine getting your kid killed for Saddam? It's kind of like, you really have to get rid of Saddam. It's cost 50 cents for a 50 caliber bullet to kill him. Maybe I've lived too long, but I cannot understand why we need 13 bases in the Middle East, why we help overthrow Syria to help the Israelis. Why? It's like an unfolding comedy. And the target of the comedy is us.
Well, let me ask you this, because of course AIPAC does remain, of course, a formidable force in US politics, and much of the debate around American foreign policy tends to focus on Israel and its influence, and the broader kind of Jewish American lobby. But recent polling suggests a significant portion of Jewish Americans, around 60%, don't support Netanyahu's current government. And at the same time, the influence of evangelical Christians and Christian Zionists, for whom Israel is a central, political and theological issue, is often said to be growing substantially. I mean, the estimates are of around 30 million Christian Zionist supporters in the US. So what would you say to the idea that actually focusing on this sort of Jewish American lobby kind of overlooks the scale and political weight of the Christian Zionist lobby, which surely is the main motor here, and they are Americans?
No, they're not Americans. How can they be Americans if they support a country that's always at war and dragging us into wars with them and costing us billions and billions of dollars, rather that could be spent at home or, God forbid, reduce the debt? You can't consider that person an American except he's a citizen, and you got to respect that. You got to respect his rights. But to regard them as being Americans who are reliable and it's appealed to. And how do you appeal to this voting bloc? By giving more money to Israel, because they have some understanding of the Bible, whether it's valid or not, that as Israel goes, so will all Christians. And I don't care about that argument, frankly. All I know is they live here, they benefit from everything that's here, and yet they work to get us more wars in the Middle East.
So Trump's personal sort of evangelical preacher, Pete Hegseth, Susie Wiles, who's now Donald Trump's chief of staff, who was part of Benjamin Netanyahu's re-election campaign, not Americans.
I don't regard aiding a foreign power as a good sign of citizenship. And that's exactly what's going on here. The Congress caters to Israel not only for money, but for votes. As you said, 30 million people is a big voting bloc.
The Christian Zionist bloc, which is, significantly larger than the number of Jewish Americans, most of whom, today, the majority of whom today don't actually support Netanyahu's government. So it's just interesting because, it sounds to me like the fire is within your house. It's within the Christian American house. And there's a lot of externalizing onto kind of the Jewish lobby in America. But, where is the sort of attention to the Christians within your own community, many of them Republicans, who are driving this? Aren't they the real, quote-unquote, enemy within?
It's almost always the case that the greatest enemy you find about things in your country are in your country. And in this case, I would go back to General Washington, who said at the time of the Constitution that he wondered if the Republic could exist because of the avarice of American business and Americans generally to make buck, to get a business, to get ahead. And I think you have to put that into the pot when you talk about these things. The avarice of Americans is extraordinary. And if you look at the Congress, again, taking, and who else, who knows what other countries aren't paying them? But if you look at the problem, the Israel problem is our problem. Our problem. We caused it. We take their money. We take their guff. We take their, bleeding appeals for help because they're a little country in a big, bad world. This is our problem. You're exactly right. And the problem has to be solved by us. One way to do that is to let Israel go off their own hook and see how the Middle East goes. Again, we have this little thing called the Atlantic. But I agree with you 100% that we are the cause of this problem, because we have a governing class that takes money and depends on it for elections, whatever. I think you're exactly right.
And let me ask you about the wider implications of the sort of non-interventionism of the United States, because the former head of Mossad, Tamir Pardo, has recently compared the actions of Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank to those of Nazis during the Holocaust. I mean, those were his own words. If America stopped backing Israel tomorrow, would you still support sanctions against Israel or any form of action to stop the behavior that we've just heard the former head of Mossad describe in those terms?
I'm not in favor of sanctions against most anybody, but from a purely intelligence perspective. One of the problems we have with Iran, one of the problems we had with Iraq, was that we had sanctions on them and we withdrew our embassies and our presence there. And so the sanctions meant to hurt Iraq and Iran, and they did, but what they did was blind us. Have you thought, maybe you certainly have, but what kind of an intelligence failure this must be, this war, given that no one thought that Iran could possibly do what it's doing with missiles, didn't know they had them, it didn't know they could use them like they are. Now, part of the problem for that is we haven't had an intelligence on the ground capacity to collect intelligence in Iran for how many years? What you do when you put sanctions on a country, especially if you think it's a dangerous country, what you do is put a pencil in your eyes because you become blind. You can do a lot of things with electronics, you can do a lot of things with satellites, but you can't get in the field of the people, you can't get to a point where you can recruit somebody to work against their government. It's a disaster. So sanctions are much more than money.
Sure. So park the sanctions idea. My point was obviously more general than that, right? My point to you was even the former head of Mossad is basically saying what the Israelis are doing in Palestine, in the West Bank, is akin to the Holocaust that the Nazis did. In the Second World War, America did intervene because of the Nazis in Europe. Would you support an intervention to stop what this man is himself describing as a Holocaust?
No, that's their problem to take care of. I wouldn't have supported war in Europe in 1945 or 1940. That's your business. That's not our business.
You would have left us to speak German, I guess.
What I would have done is, I hope I would have been, as a British citizen, I would have supported and demanded a rearmament after World War I so he could cope with that. And I would have found a better man, I hope, than Chamberlain to get you out of the mess. But Europe is not our concern. The greatest thing that may come out of this long war, the only good thing is to defeat this destruction of NATO.
I mean, NATO is obviously part of a wider security apparatus that is supposed to be about kind of guaranteeing mutual defense for our allies. Let me ask you, in an interview you said the United States' existence is dependent on staying out of as many wars as we can, right? So Iraq and Afghanistan cost the US trillions, but defense contractors and war-adjacent interests made huge gains. Now, with Iran, we're seeing new winners. The politically connected businesses, you already mentioned Eric Trump being awarded a $24 million defense contract. Jared raised $5 billion for his private equity fund. The fossil fuel industry is skyrocketing. BP in this country has just announced record profits. So you say war is bad for America, but it's clearly not bad for all Americans.
Clearly, isn't that the problem? And how do you get around that? The only possible way we have is elections or civil war.
Which is your pick?
I know a lot about the Civil War. I'm not eager to see that again. But the reason for the Second Amendment is not to kill ducks, it's to kill politicians who turn out to be traitors. And you always have to keep that in your mind. And that's why they want to get rid of the guns. They're afraid. They're afraid of everyone standing up and saying, you've screwed up long enough.
Well,
it would be a terrible thing. No money.
But that is what's been happening, right? We've just seen another alleged assassination attempt on President Trump at the White House Correspondents' Dinner by suspect Cole Thomas Allen, who called himself a friendly federal assassin. It seems that it was his Christian beliefs that was
And a
central
Democrat.
to his manifesto. Well, he was Christian, he was using biblical arguments to justify violence, right, as a moral duty. You've previously called for political violence against those with opposing views in one of your blog posts. I mean, do you still believe that political violence can be justified against so-called enemies? I mean, isn't that just feeding a terrible cycle of retributive violence that surely isn't good for anyone?
Well, it was certainly good for the North. In our Civil War, they colonized the South and still keep it colonized. But a Civil War is just an end of the road. It's not something you plan in advance for an awful long time. It's something that occurs, and there's always something that strikes us. Lincoln's election triggered the Civil War, but not for the reason that it was Lincoln, and not for the slave. It had everything to do with economics in the United States. And the use of the Constitution in unconstitutional ways. You know, you can never underestimate how much people know about the Constitution in the United States and about how much they know about their rights. The politicians always forget it, or don't care, or don't think the American people have the guts to do anything. But, you know, time runs out. These people are on a short rope, both Democrats and Republicans, because you can't afford to feed your kids, you don't have work. And at the same time, money's flowing into NATO, money's flowing into Israel, money's flowing into all kinds of activities, you know, protecting birds in Africa, for Christ's sake.
Most of the foreign aid has pretty much been cut at this point. Economist Stephen Keen and others have suggested Trump is using the war to justify a much bigger economic and geopolitical shift away from the old dollar and finance model towards a more direct war and industry model of growth. And in that framing, Trump is using the war to push the US economy towards higher oil prices, bigger military spending, and a renewed boost for the military industrial complex, even if that hurts the average American household. What's your take on that theory? And is that the basis for an insurrection? Because it sounds like that's close to what this shooter was opposing.
Well, yeah, his manifesto is pretty much the norm. If you notice in this country, most of the violence comes from the left, and just because people don't complain as much as they should, perhaps they don't demonstrate as much as they should against the kind of criminality that's centered in Washington D.C. doesn't mean the anger isn't there. And you make a good point on the family of Trump. I find it ludicrous that we put up with that kind of thing, but I'm an old guy. I don't know how to get around it. All you've got is the vote or the gun, and no one wants the gun. But you know, just look at Iran. You send to a man who, for better or worse, represents a country that's 2,700 years old and has been, pushed around by the Israelis now for 80 years or 60 years. And you send two Jewish Americans to deal with them? Now, what is the leader of that country going to think? He's going to think that those two guys are going to report to Netanyahu before they report to the president. Right or wrong? I don't know. But do you really think that it was a smart thing not to use your senior diplomats to do that, at least to show some respect for the country you're dealing with, instead of sending two peddlers of real estate?
I mean, what's confusing, of course, is that, I mean, it sounds to me that was also a very absurd decision, but it was taken by the same man that you say you would vote for again, even though he's literally sending his relatives to enrich themselves off the misery of the American people, not to mention the people of the region. So I think that's where it doesn't sort of fully stack up. And I do have to say that, the report on violence outside of state violence in America, the most recent one, the one that was taken down off the US government website, pointed to far-right groups as being the principal source of violence in America, not leftist groups. I mean, that's been peddled by the current administration, but it isn't reflected in the numbers. Let me ask you, my final question is about, you placed considerable hope in President Trump as, the man who was going to, quote unquote, make America great again. And he has clearly disappointed significantly. Where do you see hope coming from today? Where is the change that you and many others in America feel is necessary going to come from?
Ma'am, if I knew that answer, I'd probably be worth more than $40. I don't know where it's going to come from. After the tragedy of Trump on how he's performed so far, where else do you look? You look into the Congress? I don't think so. The governors don't seem to be a shining process. I don't know what the answer is. I know what I think. I think we're drifting to the point where Americans are going to say, this isn't working. The election's not working. We get a choice of people who get into government and do nothing about what they said they were going to do. And where does that lead? I think it leads to civil war at some point. And like I said, the worst thing in the world is a civil war, especially for my grandchildren. But what do you do? It's always a case in the United States in my lifetime of picking the lesser of two evils. And the demonstration of what we've learned from Trump's words and his actions is a reminder that we're at the bottom of the barrel. How long can we keep voting for people?
Guys and gals, me Mudahar. I'm going to tell you guys right now, we have got some nuclear grade internet slap fighting going on right now. Microslop, yes, this is a Microslop video, and it's not just an average video. I think I found their biggest hater possible. Now, ladies and gentlemen, to give you a quick understanding over here, when you use a computer, what is the scariest thing that can happen to you? Getting hacked. And sometimes getting hacked is kind of out of your control, right? You can update everything, you can change your passwords a million times, but what happens when somebody uses an exploit or a hack that nobody knows of? That's what we call a zero-day attack. Somebody defines an exploit and they don't report it to anybody, meaning that for months something could be happening in the background and you'll realize it at the very end. There are lots of criminals, there are just lots of people in general that would be willing to pay tons of money on the dark web for 0 days on things like an iPhone.
After an entire year of being told AI was going to wipe out jobs, the collapse hasn't happened. Not yet. Unemployment hasn't spiked, most people have their roles, the economy looks, well, pretty much the same as last year. And that creates a strange tension. You heard the warnings, you felt the fear, but now you're sitting here wondering, did the hype come and go? Was this another cycle of exaggerated tech panic? Maybe it's just another tool, like email once was, like social media once was. Useful, disruptive, but certainly not going to replace me altogether. And that's exactly where most people are right now, in a waiting game. But history has a way of repeating itself. Before the 2008 financial crisis, the unemployment numbers didn't collapse first. The early crash showed up in places most people weren't looking. So the real question isn't whether AI has replaced jobs yet, it's whether we're watching the wrong indicators. Is this stability real, or is it actually just the calm before the storm? If there's anyone who can help us make sense of the moment, it's Shanae Bovell, one of the leading futurists working at the intersection of technology and society. She's spoken at the United Nations over 10 times, and she's in the rooms with people building these systems. She hosts a global series of Microsoft and AI and the future of work, and she has a track record of seeing inflection points before the rest of the world feels them. If we're misreading this moment, she's the person who can show us where the cracks actually are. And that matters because modern life is changing ways that make living well harder than it should be. And the coming wave of AI isn't just another tool. It may reorganize how value is created and who gets to create it. Most of us are already operating in a quiet state of survival, trying to keep up with systems we didn't design, feeling behind before we even made a choice. And And that's why Mighty Pursuit exists, to give you a North Star and turn your mind, body, and spirit into one clear roadmap for living well. The podcast is where we slow down and examine one part of that roadmap at a time. And today we zoom in on purpose, how AI may reshape our work, our careers, and what it means to stay ahead of the curve. This conversation takes you behind the scenes and lays out practical insights you'll need to navigate this year and the age to come. So let's begin. So I want you to imagine someone, let's call her Sarah. She spent all of 2025 hearing that AI was going to wipe out jobs, the white-collar work would collapse, the entire industry would disappear. And so now it's 2026. She still has her job. None of her friends have been replaced, at least not yet. And so her life mostly looks the same. And she's starting to wonder if it was all overhyped. What would you say to her?
And what I say to Sarah? I would say that we are definitely overestimating the impact that we'll see with AI and jobs and change in the short run. So I think over the long term, a lot of the jobs that Sarah is hearing about in 2025 that will eventually go away or be radically transformed and become unrecognizable, that will be true over the 18-month or 24-month convenient timeline that also happens to coincide with a lot of funding cycles and raising cycles. Probably not. We're starting to see some changes in the data with respect to labor and skill composition within workflows. But this idea, and I know I've heard the stats too, 50% of white-collar jobs could be obsolete by, and maybe now it's been pushed to 2027, 2028.
No.
That might not be the case over the short term, but over the long term, depending on what Sarah does, I would say that she could bet that her job will look really different, or maybe not exist at all. That workflow might not make sense.
When you say short term and long term, how do you define those?
That's a great question, and I know the pendulum keeps swinging and moving. I would say short term for me is 3 years, which is interesting because that tends to be companies' longer-term strategic plans, which is just tragic. If you're thinking 3 years into the future and that's where it ends, you're probably going to get disrupted. And longer term, I would say looking 7 to 10 years. And so there, the forecast seems to be, and it's funny, the further out you go into the future, the less you can predict or see. But when it comes to these general purpose technologies that behave in a certain way, your estimates of change tend to be a little bit more, not accurate, but closer to the forecast.
When you think about technology change throughout history, I mean, 7 to 10 years is still pretty short term. I mean,
Yeah.
if you think about the fact that, I mean, however many thousands of years of history it took to get to the internet in like the 1990s, and then even from then to social media to now, I mean, 7-10 years is like nothing.
Well, I guess we could count, I mean, AI has been around for a while, but if we could count from the end of 2022, where ChatGPT really came on the scene, and then if we're looking 10 years from now, so we're looking around 13 years in this latest era of
Yeah.
Transformers architecture lifespan, what type of change could we see? And it's not actually that unforeseeable. I mean, if you look at about 80 years, 60% of the occupations that exist today didn't exist 80 years ago. And if we're to go back to the Industrial Revolution, moving from agriculture to mechanized work and then the rise of factory labor, you're looking at about 70% of people doing something radically different over 100 years. So the question that's in front of us is, what would that look like to have 70% of the population do something different, but not on an industrial scale or an industrial timeline, but closer to that 10 to 15 to 20 years? And that's where you could see it as alarm bells, or maybe that's reassuring for a lot of people, but that's where the time scale tends to start making a little bit more sense.
So when you hear figures like Elon Musk and Sam Altman say that like AI is going to replace most jobs, do you feel like people should believe those sorts of statements?
I would say it's what is the part two to that? So a lot of the different tech leaders will say, and there's different economists depending on where you fall, that sure, maybe a lot of the jobs that they're currently building AI systems for could maybe be done by AI systems. And this would be specifically knowledge work. So things that are happening on a computer, maybe financial analysts or tax returns or paralegals, that type of role or roles that involve those types of tasks. So could those be wiped out? Potentially. That's at least what they're optimizing and building AI specifically to do. But that's where their forecasts tend to end. It's over, and that is the end. All the best to everybody else. I see a part 2 to that, and depending on which economists you subscribe to, they would either agree or disagree. That when an input becomes more abundant, so in this case, it's going to be, we'll say intelligence, and we'll definitely use it in air quotes, the economy will reconfigure around that new resource becoming abundant. And it could reconfigure in really strange ways, the same way when communication and distribution became free and abundant, aka the internet. People started to make money over pretending they were in a vehicle, and they're not, and they're filming a video about something, and there's an entire new economy around that. So when intelligence becomes much cheaper, how does the economy reconfigure? And then what do we do on the other side of that? We will do something. We'll probably work less. We'll probably work in very unrecognizable ways, even though what we're doing right now, what are we doing, right? That's entirely unrecognizable. So it will still be like that. It will just be something different and something that doesn't necessarily resemble the knowledge economy. Those tasks will probably go to AI. But there's a lot of disagreement. There will be AI leaders that would push back on that and say, nope, it's done, and then the robots are here. I think there will be a part 2.
What do you mean that what we're doing is unrecognizable?
I mean, how would you describe the work that you and I do? Or even the work of a brand manager to somebody 150 years ago?
That's a good point, yeah.
What would you say that actually is? Somebody is helping to describe, well, what's a brand? Well, it's, okay, so why is there somebody managing that? All of these jobs that we invented and towards more service and towards more knowledge work. So we moved from a world where work was, or labor was defined by muscle. Now we're in a world where labor is defined in some ways by the cognitive capabilities you have, and we're moving to a world where work may be defined by, and that's variable X.
Yeah, we don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's fascinating, really, if you, as a thought experiment, if you go through that. Think about if you explain to somebody in 1850, like, oh, we record, what do you mean record? Like, so
We
it's
send
just like,
emails.
yeah.
We build Microsoft Excel sheets, and we try to predict how much money people in a different country are going to have. Well, why would you do that? Like, all of these things that we've created don't necessarily make sense out of context. And that's why whatever comes next won't really make sense to us right now, because the systems that encompass it have truly not been invented.
Now, in terms of the statements from these tech figures, so one of our recent guests was Bill Gurley, and he's like a legendary investor in Silicon Valley. Uber was the big thing that he got in early on. And so we were talking with him about like AI fear. And it's interesting because he's like an insider with I think Venture Capital, and he's just talking about how these people hype their own products and services to raise more money. And so basically, in some ways, the thing that is like sparking fear ends up raising a ton of money because it's so hyped, like we're going to build this thing, and then that leads them. So do you feel like that reality is also accurate part of the picture?
Sure, yeah. There's definitely marketing and fundraising incentives that are driving some of the narratives that we hear, and that isn't anything new. So yes, I think some of the narratives definitely come from, we have a funding round coming up. The system we are particularly building can build and do all jobs in the knowledge economy. That's very profitable, and if an AI system can do that, that company's going to make a lot of money, so that makes a lot of sense. But I don't think it's entirely wrong, again, that AI will be able to do a significant portion of the jobs, some of the jobs that we see today. And even though I think there's going to be there will be an economy, how many people are in it, and do those jobs, do the jobs of the future replace, or are they actually geographically found in areas where, in regions where jobs were lost? Those are all questions that we don't necessarily know. The same way globalization changed the composition of work, and who we could say, more winners or more losers, economically speaking. We might see strange patterns like that. But yes, again, the narrative of it's going to be able to do everything is a very profitable one. So if you follow those incentives, sure, you're going to make a little bit more money, versus saying our AI can do a few tasks, sometimes for a couple people. probably not quite as much.
Yeah, it's more nuanced. Now, if you look at the latest jobs reports in the U.S., this was I think January, but I don't know what it was at in February. Employment's still growing, and unemployment is hovering around levels that we've kind of seen for years. In parts of Europe, there's some softening, but nothing resembling a collapse. So on the surface, the labor market looks steady right now, if you were to just like read the news headlines. So is that a misreading of the data, or do you think we're just asking the wrong question entirely?
No, I mean, that is what the data does show, that even some of the productivity numbers are quite misleading as well, too. You'll hear productivity is through the roof, it's incredible, or we're not seeing anything. So I think some of that data is right. When you drill down, though, into hiring, so we're seeing some fewer job postings in certain areas. We're seeing the composition of skills within the jobs that companies are actually hiring for change. So maybe now you were hiring for a financial analyst, the person has to be able to do amazing with spreadsheets. And now if you're to actually drill down into how that post has changed or that job position has changed, you have to be able to direct and observe or apply judgment to different financial patterns. So something that's much more akin to directing or guiding AI systems over just building and crunching the numbers. So the composition of work has changed. And then that has a downstream impact because that might not be the same person. So the person who was best for the job posting in 2024 may no longer be a fit in 2026. So those are interesting signals, and kind of the level of the data that I would be going into to show, okay, who companies are hiring for is starting to change. But this idea that it's, everybody's going to be wiped out in a year, that doesn't really, I'm not seeing that data either. But I also, it's one thing for the data to be overstated, or for the data to say one set of numbers and AI companies to say something else. But policy still has an important role to play in between. And if AI companies are telling us what they're trying to build, even though it doesn't show up in the numbers yet, I think policymakers would still be wise to have a plan in the event that it goes really well or not so well. And that's the gap that I'm really paying attention to. That you can't, just because you don't see it in the numbers, it doesn't mean that you should sit back and enjoy the ride, because that ride might be really bumpy. And that's where my concerns lie. I wouldn't consider myself an optimist or pessimist on either of those things. And just because I think there's going to be an economy on the other side that involves people, it doesn't mean that that transition is smooth. And it doesn't mean that it brings everyone if you don't intentionally design a system to do that. And that's where it's still being crickets from the policy part. I think this year and over the next couple of years, we'll start to see the rise of political campaigns totally centered around AI, and not sovereign AI, national security, not that type of narrative, but what AI hopefully means for the person and the economy. I think we're going to start to see it and to hear about it.
Now, when you think about all these scenarios and preparing for them, do you see the moment that we're living in, like right now in 2026, as the calm before the storm? Is that how you would paint it, or would you paint it differently than that?
As the calm before the storm? Sure. Yeah, because if you are to zoom out into the wider historical lens and measure something over the course of a century or over the course of a few decades, change is coming. And it's not just AI that is headed towards us. There's then quantum behind it, and then there's synthetic biology, and there's space, and AI is multiplying the speed of discovery and the speed of progress in all of those fields. So sure, yes, I would say that we can see this as the calm before, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a storm, but the calm before a period where we come out on the other side, whether that's in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and life starts to become very unrecognizable. But again, we've been living unrecognizable lives. It's just likely going to compress.
So in terms of like signals of that, that there are incremental things that are changed. I mean, we talked offline about like an example, the 2008 financial collapse. Like in 2008 in the fall, I think in September, it was very dramatic what happened, and everybody was like, what the hell is happening right now? But in 2005, 2006, you had the subprime mortgages and so many like little types of like indicators. So in a technological shift like AI, what would be what would those early indicators, or what do they look like right now that you're seeing changes happening?
You can definitely always follow the money and the capital flows. So I'd say one thing that's interesting, if you track investment patterns of maybe an investment bank or a big asset fund or a big asset management, you may see money now flowing into business models that are much more resilient towards AI and away from companies or sectors where the model is more likely to be disrupted. So that's nothing, you wouldn't necessarily see a change in overall spend, but the allocation of capital and where it's moving is towards more AI resilient incumbents, so if the company already exists, or towards more AI native operating system companies, so different types of startups. So that's something that's interesting, but wouldn't necessarily, the average person wouldn't pay attention to that, and there's really no reason to. If you look at some of the multilateral institutions, so thinking like IMF, World Bank, or central banks, you can see them start to now pay attention to the impact AI will have over longer term periods. So they're not coming out and kind of waving the drum of everybody, wake up and smell the coffee to this AI train. But when you look at how they're forecasting and when you look at the types of speeches that they're making, they are planning for this next era, and AI is a general purpose technology. I'd say looking at complementary assets, so people may be getting spooked about investing in AI directly, but we're seeing a lot of investment move towards AI complements, so different sources of energy, systems that make water a lot more resilient. Can we use the water and clean it and filter it, because AI systems are going to need that. So following these investment patterns, that maybe if you're risk adverse, you're doing the thing alongside AI, but you're still indirectly betting that AI is going to be a core part. And then there's also things like the hardware. So whether it's phone manufacturers, whether it's vehicle manufacturers, redesigning devices to be able to house AI on the actual platform, so on your phone, in your car. So they're redesigning, and their manufacturing patterns, which is investment in physical hardware, are accounting for this AI future. It doesn't make sense for them to be writing the New York Times op-ed about it, but they're accounting for it. So when you look at the signals in the data, they're not necessarily the ones that are trending on X, but different big movements are happening in the data flows that we're not necessarily paying attention to.
There's this scene, I think it was in like The Big Short, of when they walked into a bank and basically they started learning that they were giving mortgages for like $800,000 houses to people that were like basically putting no money down, that were like weren't making that much money. And it was just kind of this like shocking moment of like how is this happening right now? And I think I've had moments like that of like the very real time day to day when you're actually using AI. And this is another thing we talked a little bit offline about, the fact that like something took 6 or 7 hours to do, and then you charge somebody, let's just say you're a freelancer, you charge them based on their time, and you make X amount of money. Now, the time that it actually takes to perform that task is now exponentially smaller, especially in some domains. So you could take 30 minutes. So like the value of what you're creating, when you think about that and then you extrapolate it out to every field and every sort of like business negotiation, it becomes pretty like mind-blowing, because the value that you're selling is like, oh, I was giving 6 hours of my time.
I'm joined now by the author of the new book, Taking You, which is now available for purchase, and famed astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson. Thanks so much for joining me.
Hello.
All right, we'll drop the famed. So I want to talk about a lot here, but first and foremost, I think the question that most people are curious about, and you spoke a lot about this in the book, but just on the idea of the existence of aliens. So when you're asked this question, are aliens real? What is your top line response?
So rather than answer a question posed that way, as an astrophysicist, you would have to say, what are the chances that there's life elsewhere in the universe? And that is so high as to be unusual. Given the amazing how long life has been around on Earth, it got started almost as The same rainforest with life, hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen. There's helium in there. So, for helium, we are one top 5 elements. So, if life changes, and 1995 now add all that up to suggest that we are alone in the universe you'd only